Good morning. Usually, I'll take a theme and work through it, but there's so much in the 12th chapter that I'm just going to skip through this, and I'm going to give you, just like John, the gospel writer, the beloved, the one closest to the Lord, as he says himself, he gives footnotes. And it's like the 12th chapter is special because all up until now, every chapter was creating this tension between believers and unbelievers, giving a challenge to believe. In John's gospel, there aren't miracles. There are signs. Sign is revealing who Jesus is. He's done everything up to now. The 11th chapter, he raises Lazarus from the dead on the 4th day. And people are going, no, don't do that, don't do that, he's going to stink so bad. Seriously, it's in the text. Now, in the 12th chapter, we have a dynamic going on where they're going, oh my gosh, all these people, this is from the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin. Their Pharisees are named here, but really behind it is also the Sanhedrin. They're going, oh man, he's messing things up. I mean, people are going off to, it's kind of like they create this political dynamic going on. So the Pharisees who don't jump on board and believe, because there are believers who are Pharisees, but those who have stone hard, cold hearts, they look at Jesus almost like the Antichrist. And in a political setting, and I'm not going to bias between Republicans or Democrats, but in a political setting, Democrats are saying Trump is the Antichrist. The Republicans are saying those are the evil ones. Trump's our savior. It's playing out. It's an archetype that's going on even today. But we're not going to talk any more about that. But I think it's ironic that the same kind of stuff is going on today. So we're at the 6 days before Passover. Now, it's important to understand what that is. It's the 10th day of Nisan, not the car, the month, Nisan. The 10th day of Nisan, or April 6th, 32. Same day, if you want to look at it that way. But the 10th day of Nisan is the day they choose their sacrificial lamb for the Passover. And they take that lamb, and it's already been inspected by the priests, so it can't have any flaws. And so you go up and you buy your lamb, you take it home, and you examine the lamb to make sure there isn't any flaw, because the priests get their money from selling sheep and goats and all kinds of things. That's their income. They're not farmers. So around Jerusalem, they have acres and acres and acres that surround, and they have sheep everywhere. In fact, if you look at Josephus, who's a historian at the time, he looks at one, and whether it was this particular time, or one that was within about 5 years, he noted that there were only 256,000 lambs offered on that day. So the Passover lamb, and so they try to figure out, okay, now the average household has 3 generations. That would mean that there's at least 15 people maybe involved times 1, 256. That equals how many million? You do the math. Okay? So they're on this. It's 6 days before Passover. That's the setting. And they're in Bethany. Now, 2 weeks ago when Carla was speaking, she said she thought Bethany sounded like a cool name. But she decided after she looked it up, she went, yuck, I'm not going to name my kid that way when I have kids. Bethany, as you recall, means house of affliction. Okay, so here's Bethany. It's 2 miles outside of Jerusalem. And basically, for all the losers, they would go there. In fact, there's evidence that it was kind of like the Jewish settlement created these little teeny houses. They're tiny houses. Because all the folks that crud happened to them, they went, go and get away. It's almost like you have bad luck. I don't want to get your cooties. But we're providing a place for you. Now, we also know from the other Gospels that Simon the leper, actually Simon the unleper or the healed leper, is throwing this party, and he's right there in Bethany. So, and it's also interesting because we tend to lump 2 of the times together where Martha is serving. Martha's serving at their home. Please, Jesus, get that dumb lady, sister of mine, off her butt and get over and help her, okay? And Jesus says the famous words, Martha, Martha. It depends on how you look at it, but basically it's you're troubled, you're worried, you're just all upset for nothing. Now look at Mary. She's doing what she needs to be doing, just soaking it in. So if you look around the room, we have Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, their brother and sister. So here's the setting. It's maybe a week or so from when Lazarus was raised from the dead. So you got people taking notes like crazy or worrying about, what am I going to do when I get home? Am I going to go here? That's Martha tendencies. But in this situation, it says Martha served. So she was able to actually get over the worry and the fret and being uptight, and she just served. That was her love language. There are people who have a love language of serving. One of the guys in this room that just blesses me, and one of the reasons I was drawn to him in the first place, because besides that, he's a really, really good guy, is Bob Moffat. He loves to serve. That gives him life. There are people that serve, and Martha was one of, she was into her identity. And there's others that are Marys who just, if you look around, they're the ones that just want to soak things in. Soak the moment in. And there might be someone that's half asleep. That's like Lazarus. I mean, think about it. He was dead, and now he's kind of trying to revive himself. So if there's anybody kind of falling off, and maybe the talk will put you to sleep too, you know. But that's what the setting is. So let's go on. Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard. Now, honeysuckle. Spikenard is in the family of honeysuckle. My wife used to take the flower thing off, and there was a little tube left, and she'd suck it, and it was sweet. This is the same thing, but so it's in the same family, but it's at the foot of the Himalayan mountains, which is right between India and Nepal, okay? So that's where it is. Here they are in Jerusalem. So this was a very, very costly, and so it was out of that little stuff that they made the oil. And it was rare, it wasn't abundant. And so when it created an incredibly intense, fragrant smell. And they used to keep them in little alabaster jars. Did you ever see, if you can imagine the size of a half pint, or rather a pint, in which 2 cups, it's about that high and about this big around. And back then, because it was easy to store this little thing, little bottle like this, people would buy them and they would store them. You know, there were 2 types of banks back then. There was the one in the side of the hill where they found the great pearl of price. And to be honorable, you buy the lands because you know the pearl's there, so it's way more valuable. But here they would actually store them like you'd buy gold. So they would have that hidden in their home. Now, Mary had this. I don't know if it was, they were there probably because their parents died and they were little kids. When you think of Mary and Martha, you think of, oh, middle age, right? In all reality, they were probably barely teenagers. Barely teenagers. So this was probably her dowry. So she gave everything she had away. She didn't have anything else. Think about when you were first a Christian. What was the excitement like? In Revelation, it talks about remember your first love. What would you have given away at that point? What was the passion you had in your heart? When we get older, we lose it, and we tend to drift towards our own works instead of the work of the Lord. Rekindling that first love allows us to understand Mary just giving everything. Because this is a celebration. Simon, who owns this little home, is honoring Jesus for raising his buddy, Lazarus, from the dead, and not to mention healing him from leprosy. Because if he still had leprosy, he wouldn't be able to even be there because he'd have to be outside the city walls. living near the rocks or caves or something, but he couldn't associate with people. Simon is so grateful, and he wants to honor Jesus. We have a situation where Judas is saying, what the heck is wrong? You should have put the money, sold it and put the money in. It's worth 300 denarii, or some translations, a year's worth of salary. Actually, 300 days is more accurate, but when you think about 7 days, 1 day out of 7, and then you talk about religious days, it really adds up to about 65 days. So it is 1 year's worth of work. And why is that? It says because he was a thief. The actual word is kleptes, which is where we get the word kleptomaniac. It's almost like an uncontrollable desire to pilfer anything and everything you can get your hands on. So it's not just an occasional thief, it's an obsession with them. So let's kind of roll that and go down to, you have an issue of the plot, which I already mentioned. Not only do they want to kill Jesus, they go, hey, we got to kill this Lazarus guy. But if they were not, they weren't too smart because he had just died and raised from the dead. So if they kill him, there's chances that he could come back alive anyway, but we'll just put that one aside. This is the first time that Jesus takes honor. Before, when he'd heal someone, he'd go, shh, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. 2 miles away, he has a word of knowledge we find in the other Gospels. He goes, go down the road to the 4th house on the left with the pink shingles. You'll find a little donkey colt there. Bring it back, and when the master says, hey, what the heck are you doing? Just tell him the master has need of it. Okay? So now Jesus gets on the donkey, and I imagine he doesn't ride side saddle, although there are pictures of him riding side saddle. Some crazy artist. Must have been a woman who rode side saddle. I don't know. But anyway, you have this situation where he's going into Jerusalem and they're waving palm branches, going, Hosanna, Hosanna. The actual word means save. 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 Jesus is the Lamb on that day. He is just like the 256,000 sheep have been designated for Passover. Jesus is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So Hosanna, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel. But we find out his disciples didn't even know that. Therefore, the people who were with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead bore witness to who Jesus really is. And so a gathering started coming around. In fact, they almost tried to break into this room where actually you have to look at it this way. Only the men were served, and they would lay down on a pillow like this. And women of the day would then bring in food, and they would put it beside them, and they'd eat it that way, and then the women would eat later, women and children. So here they are laying down to have their own meal. It might not be lamb, but they're having a meal. And people start coming in because they heard Jesus is in Bethany. So they surround the house and they want to see Jesus. And there's this exchange between Philip and his brother. Hey, they want to see him. Should we allow him? Because they're coming from Greece. Now, there were only 3 festivals that they had to be there. Religious people had to be there. One was Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. Those were the 3 festivals that people had to be at if they were good Jews. So these Greeks actually had to traverse the land, get over into Turkey and came down that way, or they took a ship, which was very expensive, to get into Jerusalem. And so they're going, we heard about it. We want to see it. Who's Lazarus? I want to see Lazarus. He really true, raised from the dead. Yeah, and now Jesus. And so that's part of this horde. And they're going, okay, we see you. We see Lazarus. And then Jesus has this little conflict about, well, I'm going to be raised up. And so what does that mean? Raised up like into heaven, raised up like on the cross. John is so good about creating a tension between meanings. He, like the woman at the well, he says, if you knew who I was, I'm the Hudor's own. I have Hudor's own. And it can mean living water, which it's translated for us dummies because we can't read Greek. But it can also mean spring water. So she reacts as spring water. So where's your bucket, Jesus? In this situation, raised up. Is it cross? Is it resurrection? Is it exalted? It means all 3. And he refers to himself as Son of Man. Now, Son of Man was a typical saying for a humble person who is a prophet. And then he talks about he having to die. He goes, that doesn't make sense. Wait a minute. The Messiah is the one that's supposed to live forever. So what? You're confusing us. And then he goes into a grain of wheat must die to bring forth greater stuff. Or one seed, if it dies, it germinates and seed's destroyed, but it grows a plant and it creates all this crazy seed afterwards. So it's like, for the most part, he says, the Father says, he struggles with, should I not do what I'm called to? No, I'm going to do what the Father wants. And the Father echoes, you have been glorified. You have glorified me. And you'll glorify again. And that means that it comes from kind of Hallel, which is taking a piece of metal and shining it up so that you just sparkle the image. Jesus, he's saying, you sparkle me, Father God, Papa. Actually, when he taught us to pray, he says, Abba, which really doesn't mean our Father, it means Dada. Dada. But when they hear this, it's one of those things that most didn't understand the Lord's voice. They couldn't hear it. They heard it as thunder. Now, I've heard the Lord speak twice in my life. And it is a kind of a thunderous sound. And so there are folks that heard thunder. And there are folks that said, no, I heard an angel. Well, they knew it was supernatural and what they heard. But you know, when I've taught courses on the prophetic, really what it's all about is learning to hear. Learning to hear different ways from God. Giving you an ability to hear all kinds of different ways. Last summer, I only taught 12 different ways you can hear from God. The more we can hear from different ways, the more we understand our identity. It says in Scripture, Psalm 139, that God's words for us, his encouragement for us, is as the number of sand grains on the seashore. Now, I found out there are folks that, because they say, well, the sea is rise because the polar caps are melting and all that, and even in Jakarta, they're having to move the capital to a different island because Jakarta is actually, the water is coming in. Now, is that because the ocean is rising, or is it because they're drawing so much water out of the ground to feed those many people, and so the island is sinking? I don't know. But they say, well, if it's rising, then there's less seashore. So the calculations done before, which were 7.5 quadrillion, which is 975 with 19 zeros. That was the old calculation. The new one, oh, it's not nowhere near that. It's only 700 trillion. So at the least, he's got 700 trillion words for you to establish who you are and understand who you are. At the most, or maybe close to it, 7.5 quadrillion. So the Lord has all kinds of good stuff to say about you and to identify who you are, and you are special and called out, and no one else can have what you have. So what were you brought here for? What is your purpose? How are you defined to be in this world? That's a good question to mull over. Why did God, before the foundation of the world, who thought of me, who thought of you, what was it in his thinking for my purpose, for your purpose? What is your role? I saw a shirt that said, my home is heaven, I'm just recruiting. Are you a recruiter? Think about it.